So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the McGraw-Hill National Reading Consultant, Marisa Russo. Marisa has spent 12 years with McGraw-Hill traveling all over the country to speak with reading teachers and especially focusing on Common Core state standards today. Her passion is reading instruction, and she was a first grade teacher prior to joining us. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Marisa.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm excited to be here to share with everyone valuable information about how teachers can improve their transition to the Common Core. As schools transition to the Common Core standards, new terms and areas of emphasis are emerging. These are things that are and will have a significant impact on the type of instruction we deliver for our students. One that is receiving a lot of emphasis is complex text, and specifically how to help students read and comprehend it. We have 3 goals for today. The first is to explore what makes a text complex. The second is to understand why complex texts are being emphasized in the Common Core state standards. And thirdly, I would like for you to walk away with some strategies for helping students access these texts. We will watch video models, see examples of complex text, and we will evaluate a text for complexity. But before we do this, let's just take a few minutes to review the Common Core standards to make sure we are all on the same page so that we have a shared understanding of what they are and how accessing complex text fits in. So what about accessing complex text? How do these concepts fit in with the Common Core state standards? In the reading portion of the standards, we see both familiar and unfamiliar concepts. Which of these do you think may be new to your classroom? Take a minute to look at these. Informational text, compare and contrast, make connections, summarize, text-dependent questions, accessing complex text, text evidence, and close reading. In our analysis, we see an increased emphasis on a number of new concepts, such as asking text-dependent questions, using text evidence for answers, close reading, and accessing complex text. All of these are related to the new types of text demands in the Common Core standards. But what do reading standards actually say? There are 4 major themes or categories in the reading portion of the Common Core state standards. These include key ideas and details, craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, and range and level of text complexity. Notice the words I have written in red. The last category specifically focuses on the level of text students read in a given school year and the range of texts that are required for each grade level. Let's take a deeper look. The individual standard under reading, range and text complexity are very consistent. For the sake of discussion, I have combined the reading literature and the reading informational text standards for grades 1 and 4 to compare. Let's read them for grade 1 and 4. Starting at grade 1, with prompting and support, read prose, poetry, and informational text appropriately complex for grade 1. For grade 4, read and comprehend literature, including stories, dramas, and poetry, and informational text in the grades 4-5 text complexity band proficiently with scaffolding as needed at the high end of the range. This standard details the types of text such as poetry or science text, but it also states that in grade 1, the text should be appropriately complex, whereas in grade 4, the text should be in the grades 4-5 text complexity band proficiency. Basically, in the primary grades K1, when students are learning to decode, the text should be appropriate for those demands. However, beginning in grade 2, students need to be consistently reading text at their grade level as well as some from the next grade level to push or stretch them. We will talk in much more depth about what this looks like and why this is the case. Another notable element in the standards is that the emphasis on both text complexity and the scaffolding. The Common Core standards acknowledge that they are requiring some tough reading, but also point out the need to develop proper scaffolding techniques to meet the needs for these college and career readiness demands. Again, this is something we will explore in more depth later in our discussion. So what do we mean when we say accessing complex text? Just based on what you've heard so far, take a minute to answer this poll about the challenges you see in meeting this Common Core state standard demand. What would your challenges be? Not enough time, I don't know enough about it yet, I don't have strategies to support it, or my students struggle with basic reading, or are there other reasons? Please take the poll.
Okay, we're getting up there with 70, 72%. Most people are voting here. And by the way, thank you all for being here on debate night. We know you're taking time out of your schedule. Okay, we got most everybody in here, so I'm going to go ahead and close the polls.
Okay, looks like we have about 32% say students are still struggling with basic reading skills. Okay. That's very common. And some of you answered, I don't know enough about it yet to answer. So let's start. Oops. Can we get to the next slide? There we go. So let's start by looking at how complex text is defined in the Common Core state standards. A complex text is one that you would consider to be high quality and rich in content, such as the meaty nonfiction text that you have your students read, but it also includes a wide range of literature selections, both fiction and nonfiction. The nonfiction text often helps students build a foundation in content areas like science and social studies. Why is it important? Why are complex texts so important, and why place such serious emphasis on it in the standards? The truth is that the complexity of the text students are reading in today's schools has been steadily declining over the decades, whereas the text complexity demands in the workplace have remained steady or increased slightly. As a result, there is a big mismatch between what students are able to read leaving high school and the text demands in college and the workplace. And as author and leading educator, Dr. Timothy Shanahan states, often students are placed in a reading level and they are stuck there. It's really important that students' reading experiences are varied. So each week they read some texts that are easier and some that are harder. Every few weeks, you up the challenge. If this varying of text complexity doesn't begin to occur, the consequences are clear. The consequences of this is that too many students are reading at too low a level. A high school graduate who is a poor reader is a college student who will struggle mightily to succeed. In addition, the research points to one very important fact. The complexity of what we have our students read is at least as important as what they can do with what they read. That means that regular exposure to more complex text is essential for developing college and career readiness skills. Just working on a student's reading skills at their current instructional level is not getting students far enough, fast enough. This is a big idea since we have, for decades, been careful about not putting our students in texts that are at their frustration level ever. This requires a shift in our thinking. And this requires a big shift in our classrooms. That is, students won't read only texts that are more complex. Rather, as a teacher, we will introduce your students to ever increasingly complex text throughout the year, such as one per week, and provide careful scaffolds to support the reading of that text. We will explore what these scaffolds are and what makes the text more manageable a little later. So we know that the text must be more complex, but what makes the text complex, and how do we evaluate text for their complexity so we choose the right types of books for our students to read? Let's take just a few minutes to listen to Dr. Timothy Shanahan as he discusses complex text in detail. As you listen, list all the ways Dr. Shanahan says a text might be difficult for students. Here we go, everybody.
Texts really differ. There might be a text that's going to be really hard for students for a particular reason. It might be the way the author structured the information. Maybe it's organized in a peculiar way that you really need students to pay attention to. I'd certainly want the teacher to be able to set that up. One of the ways that text difficulty is going to be measured going forward is the Lexile system. It's just a measure of readability. They give you estimates of how hard a particular book might be and whether one book is harder than another. Lexile is a very good system. I can see why the Common Core people selected it. It's highly accurate. But there are lots of other reasons why text is difficult and that children might need support in. So if the designation says this book is at a 550 Lexile, that's useful. You know it's harder than the 450, and you know it's easier than the 650, but you're kind of stuck. You don't know what would you do with this text, or why is this text hard? And in fact, texts differ in why they're difficult, and so you could have several books all written at the same Lexile level, and some of them are hard because of the vocabulary, and some are hard because of sentences, and some are hard for many other reasons. And so it's really important that we read each text carefully and we try to understand, Lexiling them is a good idea, but once you've got a text that's sort of in the right neighborhood, now you've really got to look at it and decide what is it that might be challenging about this specific text. Sometimes a text presupposes that you're going to know particular things, that you know what's already happened up to a particular point. And a 7-year-old child, an 8-year-old child might not know that information. And so making sure that they have access to that before they read the text makes great sense. We have to recognize these are students who are learning to read. They're going to bring a very wide set of backgrounds to a text, and it is critically important that the teacher pay attention to that and give pre-reading support when it's needed and trim it down to as little as possible when it isn't needed. And so how you start out a story or article might differ from lesson to lesson, which is quite appropriate. But let's think about some of the other kinds of things that might make a text difficult. For example, sometimes a text is hard because of something called cohesion, how well the different ideas connect up with each other. And so let's say the story starts out with a fairly simple sentence. The boy bought a toy at the store. So the boy bought a toy at the store. And now we're going to go on and find out about what happens with this event. And, well, maybe the next sentence will refer to the boy as John. And so now you have to link the boy to John. Maybe it will refer to the toy as it. And so now you've got to link the toy to it. And as the text unrolls, there will be pronouns that will be used. There will be synonyms that will be used. There will be different names that will be used. And the good reader is constantly making those connections, linking up all those ideas. Kids often have trouble with that. Some texts are really challenging in that regard. There are other texts that might be difficult because of the way the authors organize the information. Maybe This is a text where it starts out just sort of listing a lot of information or enumerating a lot of information about something, and then in the whole second section, it's all comparing it with something else. So, oh, you're reading about alligators, you find out all about alligators, and then there's this whole section comparing them with crocodiles. And you look and you go, wow, it's the comparisons with crocodiles that are really going to confuse them. I've got to make sure that they have enough support so that I can guide them to think about that. So there's always something that could be a little bit different in one text or another that might be the challenge. And so the trick is to read it ahead of time, figure out what that challenging feature might be, and then make sure that the supports are either there. They could be there in pre-reading. They might be there once the students have struggled with the text a bit, and now you tell them that information or add that information and let them try it again and see if they can do it better. But you don't just throw students in the deep end. You've got to help them a little bit.
So what can teachers do? Well, it says read the text in advance to determine the challenging features and provide necessary support prior to and even during reading. That's good information for us to know that we just have to support the students as much as possible. Now let's look at text complexity. There are 3 factors that must be considered when evaluating a text complexity. Let's look at the first one. Quantitative measures can be determined using a computer program and are clear and best first stab at finding that just right level for your students. These involve the use of readability formulas such as Dale-Shaw, Flesch-Kincaid, and Lexile based on word frequency, sentence length, and other factors specific to the formula. Therefore, you might get a grade level designation for a book such as a grade 3 level, but Lexile such as 450. We're going to go to our second poll and choose the statement that most closely reflects your use of Lexile levels. Would it be that Lexile measures indicate an appropriate leveled book? Would it be I don't understand Lexile levels, so I won't use them? Or number 3, Lexiles have some influence on my book selection process. Please take them.
Yeah, I was going to say the polls are open now. I wanted to let everybody know that the audio link that you heard also has a video. Video is sometimes a little funny in webinars. It's a little choppy, but these are excellent videos, and I've sent you a video link in chat, and you can get on to our video library, and you'll be looking for the video that is entitled What Makes a Text Complex with Dr. Timothy Shanahan. And we're still getting some votes in here, so I will just give everybody another minute. Still a couple more votes.
Wow, we're very close.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay.
Well,
all right.
Looks like the majority said Lexiles have some influence on my book selection process. So some of you are very familiar, but with all readability formulas, you must be cautious. And this is precisely why the creators of the Common Core State Standards don't want us to rely only on one factor to determine a book's complexity. Here is a classic example. You all love this one, which you'll see based on the Lexile formula, using sentence length and unique words, Harry Potter and Hemingway's The Old Man of the Sea have the same Lexile score. Yet, clearly, Hemingway is much more complex for younger readers who can easily enjoy Harry Potter. This is where qualitative features and reader and text consideration come into play. Yes, Lexile scores play a prominent role. However, as identified by Williamson in 2006, a 350-point Lexile gap exists between 12th grade text and those that's used in college. The intent is to systematically raise the expectation of text complexity from elementary school so students in high school are prepared for the necessary in college and in many careers. Since the 2010 publication of the Common Core State Standards, the text complexity grade bands have been widened and you will notice overlap both at the low and high ends of the Lexile ranges across grade levels. So there are 3 factors that must be considered when evaluating text complexity. We looked at quantitative measures and the Lexile levels. Now, qualitative features require the human eye, okay, the human eye, to look at a text and consider what might make it complex. Other than a sentence length and vocabulary, we got to look at things such as the structure or the organization of the text, the use of convention, background knowledge demands, text layout, and other things. Can make a text more or less difficult than another text at that same Lexile level. And finally, reader and task features are critical. Only the classroom teacher can make the final decision. So reader and task feature is only for the teacher that can make this decision regarding a book's appropriateness by considering the reader, the student who will use this book, and the task required for using that book. Is it reading for pleasure, for use during guided and scaffolded reading lesson, for research, or other reasons? Now that you have considered you have seen what makes text complex with your students based on complexity or level, you as a teacher still need to evaluate each specific text for things in that text that might pose problems for your students. In order to address them in your instruction, the first step is being able to identify what actually makes a piece of text complex. And here's the list: purpose, genre, the organization, connection of ideas, sentence structure, specific vocabulary, and if there's a lack of prior knowledge. If you looked at if you listened to that Tim Shanahan video and you have a list, you probably see the same list that you see here. If a piece of text is too difficult for students, then using an accessing complex text scaffold around one of the key areas, from purpose to organization to sentence structure, will be extremely beneficial during reading instruction. Let's briefly look at 3 examples of accessing complex text scaffolds. I'm going to call them ACT or ACT. ACT scaffolds, accessing complex text, to give you a sense of what this really means when you have text in front of you. Okay, the first is an example of a challenge connected to purpose. The specific purpose of a text will influence how a reader interacts with the text. The purpose may be implied or ambiguous, or it may be more complicated than to simply inform, entertain, or persuade. For example, in narrative nonfiction, students may be unsure whether to focus on a real person's feelings and actions or on factual information. This ACT scaffold, accessing complex text scaffold, can help clarify students' focus. It also will help students explore and make inferences about the author's purpose in an informational text when it is not clearly stated. The second is an example of an issue around connection of ideas. When reading complex text, students need to make inferences and synthesize information throughout the text. For example, informational text usually includes several important ideas and details. Students need help understanding what to focus on and to find the essential idea. ACT scaffolds help students see how to link specific information together to find the essential idea. And the third and last example is in regards to the sentence structure. Students may need to comprehend complicated or unusual sentence structures in order to understand the text as a whole. For example, nonfiction selections often include long, dense sentences. An ACT scaffold shows students how to interpret difficult sentences or how to break them into more understandable forms. So let's quickly look at these accessing complex text scaffolds in action to get a better feel for what they look like in classroom practice. Before I play the video, I just want you to keep in mind that during webinars, sometimes the videos don't show very clearly. We will send you a link via chat so you can view these videos whenever you like. But in this video, you will see an intermediate grade teacher address 3 issues of text that may be complex for students. Notice that the focus of this reading is not addressing everything in the text and what it has to say, but only those portions that are challenging. Okay, here we go.
As students progress to more difficult texts, there may be features of those texts that make them more challenging to understand. In this video clip, you'll see excerpts from a close reading lesson in which Wiley Blevins focuses on helping students understand several features of complex text. The features he addresses include author's purpose, difficult vocabulary, and sentence structure. As the class rereads the text together, notice that Mr. Blevins asks guiding questions to generate discussion, relates meaning back to the students' experiences in the real world, and frequently partners students within the whole group setting to further engage them in the text.
Now, Guillermo shared with us a really interesting fact from the story that when Philo's father took him to see that train, he was afraid at first. Why do you think the author wanted to tell us that? Talk to your partner and see if you can figure out why the author might have wanted to tell us that.
Even though he really liked wasn't really sure about what
I want Lauren to share one of her ideas for why she thinks he was scared, because I think it's really insightful. Lauren.
I thought it was kind of interesting because he invented so many good things, and then you would never think he'd be nervous when he was little.
Yeah, it was surprising that here this great inventor was afraid of something that he was going to someday learn so much about and tackle. Exactly. I think that's one of the reasons, because it makes Philo feel more human to us, doesn't it? We can relate to him, because there are things that scare us when we're very young. Okay. Why did the author make a point to talk about things like telephones and phonographs? What was so special about these 2 inventions that gives us a hint that Philo might create, excuse me, the TV someday? Yeah.
Well, they kind of contributed to his want to learn that knowledge, so it kind of contributed to it.
What was it that fascinated him about these 2 inventions in particular?
Did you notice all the engagement techniques the teacher used to keep things moving along? Engagement is critical. He used his own voice, and he modeled thinking out loud. It's very important to keep students engaged along the way. Now we're going to look at a sample text in grade 4. This is going to be a sample text from our completely new McGraw-Hill Reading Wonders program, built on the new Common Core State Standards. Not just aligned or correlated, but truly built from the ground up. Teachers said they are looking for instructional scaffolding to help support close reading. Only Reading Wonders provides the ACT, the ACT, scaffolding support for every grade level. Let's take a look at how this works. Thanks to program authors, Dr. Tim Shanahan and Dr. Doug Fisher, every week, Reading Wonders will clearly identify what makes text complex and, most importantly, what to do about it. So as you see here, this is the teacher's edition pages, and the teacher here at point of use has the Accessing Complex Text box, and it says here what will make text complex: genre, purpose, sentence structure, organization, connection of ideas. These are the five pieces that will make this text complex, and what to do about it along the way as we read. So we're going to focus on genre in this reading. There's going to be support focusing on purpose. What is the purpose of this story? What's the author's purpose? Is it from what point of view is the story told. There's support there. Across every grade level, there's that ACT support scaffolding box that'll help access complex text for students. You also have support with organization. How is this text organized? Where is Rodney when he thinks of a good idea for his paper? Organizing that. Vocabulary, is this literal or non-literal meanings? So for example, what does Rodney mean when he says that Melody sings like a moose? So it's giving specific support on vocabulary that could hinder comprehension. And of course, connection of ideas, connecting the text. So throughout the program, you see support with accessing complex text. The challenge as we move forward is knowing when and how to use texts that are harder for students than what we've worked with in the past. If you are using one of the McGraw-Hill programs, you have a built-in system to make this easier. The leveled readers in the programs include one book each week written at multiple levels. Approaching level for struggling readers, beyond level for our advanced learners, and a sheltered version of the on-level book for our English language learners. All the books focus on the same topic, same vocabulary words, and same comprehension skills. For the nonfiction titles, the topic and the photos and all the images are the same, page by page in the book. What differs is the complexity of the text. So how is this useful? Well, let's look at the approaching level student, just for an example here. Ideally, during small group differentiated instruction time, these students will read the approaching level book the first 3 days of the week. After that, we level up the reading complexity by having them read the on-level book the remaining 2 days of the week. In essence, the work done with the approaching level book provides an ideal scaffold for these students to read the on-level book, written on the same topic, focusing on the same key vocabulary, and that same comprehension skill. Likewise, for our on-level students, we have them read the on-level book for the first 3 days of the week. Then we can level up to the beyond level book. This way, all students are reading more complex text every week, but in a way that is scaffolded to ensure success. The goal of leveling up is to gradually build students' reading stamina. Every unit in Reading Wonders provides direct support for achieving this with your students. So students not only gradually read more complex text, they also increase the amount of text they read with longer passages or selections. Keep in mind that if reasonable levels of instructional support are available, then students are likely to thrive when working with harder text. Before we finish, I'd like to share a technique that you can use to scaffold the complex text you have students read each week. I have a free download with this technique outlined as well, so you can take this back to your classroom. You'll see it in the chat box. In step 1, students read through the text 1 to 2 times on their own. This can be done for homework, during independent work time, or with an audio recording for students that need extra support. The goal of this reading is to give students time to work through decoding issues and get the basic gist of the selection. A critical component of this reading is note-taking. This should be a metacognitive read in which students are thinking about their thinking. Students will take notes regarding the big ideas in the selection, but also indicate places in the text that are confusing. Some of you may have heard of this being reading with pen in hand. This is exactly it. This information that's gathered in their notes will be very useful to you, the teacher, as you plan with which portions of the text to address using accessing complex text scaffolds. you'll have actual proof of what needs to be done. Note, this is not the time you read the selection to students. Yeah, students must work through the selection and self-identify areas of difficulty. Okay. In step 2, you guide students through a reading of the text using accessing complex text scaffolds. Your goal is to support students by addressing those places in the text that were confusing or challenging for your students. You will work together to break apart complex sentences, focus on key vocabulary, address background knowledge needs, or any other challenges of complex text that needs to be addressed. So in review, today we looked at one aspect of the Common Core State Standards that is receiving increased focus. We examined what makes a text complex, why complex texts are being emphasized in the Common Core State Standards, and techniques for helping students access these texts. I hope this presentation gave you some ideas in terms of next steps for your classroom and schools, as well as some things to think about as you transition to implementing the Common Core State Standards. I also hope you feel ready to help students access complex text and level up. I want to thank all of you for your time and participation today.
And we have some time for questions today, I believe, Marisa. So please, if you have a couple of questions have come in.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But let's go ahead and I'll share some of those questions with you, and please feel free to submit some more. So the first is, actually there's a couple about Lexiles. So the first is there a Lexile range for grades K1?
Oh, that's a great question. No, K1 Lexile range was not identified by Common Core State Standards. However, some states have added their own range. I think Kansas, for example, added the 100 to 500 Lexile range for their state in K1. But the Common Core State Standards advocate a staircase of increasing text complexity beginning at grade 2, so not K1.
Okay. Here's another one. There is, to use Lexile levels, is it a product that costs money? So in other words, I guess, in order to find those Lexile levels, do you have to have some sort of product?
Everybody's identifying now the Lexile of every selection of leveled readers and even the text selections in their core curriculum. They're identifying the numbers and the ranges.
Okay, yeah, you pretty much see them, starting to see them everywhere, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, here's another question. What if students can't read the text? And I think that came up in the polls. Yeah,
that's very common, actually, common question. Well, I would suggest taking a look at the Common Core State Standard Appendix A. That explains a lot. Appendix A will tell you that students who struggle greatly with reading the text below their text complexity grade band must be given additional support to enable them to read. So students will need additional support and scaffolding as they master higher levels of text complexity. You'll see that over and over again. Just provide the support. Even through listening comprehension, students can hear and listen at a higher level that they can read. So they're just saying support and model for students.
Okay. Okay, let's see. There's more here. How often should students revisit the text?
Oh, that's a great question. I get that often, too. It recommends multiple times. There's no exact number, but multiple times, because the more you visit, the better it is. Each revisit will strengthen the reader's base of knowledge, the language, concrete reasoning, evaluative judgment, and text analysis skills. So each time you revisit a text should be for a different purpose, for whether you're going back and revisiting for a specific skill, looking at the genre, looking at author's purpose. Each revisit will strengthen the reader's base of knowledge.
Okay, lots of questions coming in here. Let's see. Our school uses Accelerated Reader. Is that comparable to Lexile? Is that okay to use?
I honestly have never used Accelerated Reader, so I don't know that answer. I apologize, but maybe we can find out.
Okay. We've got some Treasures users with us today, and we use Treasures and have they have the leveled books. So can we use the level? Yeah, can they level up with those readers?
Definitely. Those are exactly the books I was talking about earlier, with the same vocabulary, same skill, same information, just written at different levels of complexity. So you definitely, please do. That's what they're designed to be used for, to make sure kids level up, so that on-level student can eventually read the above level, the approaching level student can try the on-level. So you have such a wealth of resources there to make sure students level up, and you stretch and scaffold.
Great, and we've got some nice support coming here from the audience. Thank you, Kathy Stephen. She writes, you can find Lexiles online on different sites. Simply name the book, and the Lexile is given. It's free, so
good.
You can probably just Google that and find it. There's a couple of special ed questions here, and let's see. Can you briefly describe how a special ed teacher would use complex text and leveling up?
Again, it would be important to really look at the recommendations found in Appendix A of the Common Core State Standards. They do provide some examples and information of what exactly would be best for students who are struggling with accessing that complex and struggling with reading, period. So all the support and recommendations can be found there in that Appendix A.
Okay, and I notice we can keep going a few more minutes with questions. For those of you who do need to leave, we will be archiving our webinar, and that'll be available on the edX site, and you'll receive an email with the archive information. Also, please do join us. Our next Common Core State Standards Teaching the Common Core webinar is going to be Collaborative Conversations, and that will also be with Marisa Russo. And that, I believe, is October 9th, and forgive me if I...
November,
excuse me, November 9th. And that's also listed on our edX site, so if you haven't registered for it, please join us then. Okay, there's another question here, a great question about vocabulary. Is it advisable to pull out key vocabulary before students begin reading? It's a success for all strategy.
Yes, helping students with comprehension is always recommended to do some prior work. So if you know for a fact there's some vocabulary that's probably going to have the student struggle, you want to definitely pre-teach the vocabulary. Not everything. They don't want it's going to be a little bit of a shift, not so much work in advance. They want the kids to actually, like I said earlier, kind of look at that text, read it once or twice, and try to make it through with decoding and try to get at least the gist of the story. So what we used to do is probably too much prep work, too much background support. They want us to back off a little bit on that and let the kids try it out first.
Okay, great. Let's see, and some folks are asking how to register for edX. Doug, I'm not sure if Doug is still with us. Can you, Doug, are you with us? Okay. I'll tell you what, we'll be able to send out the edX. Hello?
Well, the contact information that I have on my screen, everybody, if you just email me, and we'll get everything to you, all the follow-up emails and all the links and any other questions you have, we'll be happy to contact you immediately.
Yeah, and there will be a follow-up email, and I'm sure there'll be a link to the so that you can sign up for the next one. Okay, let's see.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. That's correct. I'm here now. Yeah, there'll be a follow-up email sent to everyone from GoToWebinar, and it will have the link to the recording for this session. And also, you can go to mheonline.com www.scaffolding.org/edX, and that has all of the upcoming sessions that we have available. And I'll also send that out as a chat link for everyone to click on now if they like.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so if we did not get to your question tonight, we will follow up with an email to you so that we can answer anything that's offline. Folks did ask about receiving credit for CEU credit, and what we can do for you is we can certainly validate that you attended the webinar, and we'd be happy to share with you an outline of what was discussed with our goals. And there are a couple of handouts that we sent as well, and probably a great thing to do would be to use that scaffolding technique, try it out in your classroom. And that might be some nice documentation that you can provide to your curriculum director or your PD coordinator to get those CEUs. So I would like to thank everyone, especially Marisa
Thank you.
Russo for sharing that information about accessing complex text, and to all of our participants this evening. We thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you'll be able to